Hello, everyone. Welcome back once again to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study on the book of Acts. Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt with you once again from Redeemer in Highland, Indiana, after a little bit of a hiatus for the Advent and Christmas season. Plan to get back with you today for our study, and that's what we're going to try to do. Am experiencing some technical difficulties, however. The audio has been cutting out about every 7 seconds or so. Hopefully I've solved that issue and you don't have any issues as you are watching this. If the audio does cut out, wait about 3 seconds and it should be back. That's what it was doing. But we're going to try to get this done here pretty quickly because I'm under a time crunch after dealing with those technical issues. So, Acts chapter 27 is where we're picking up. If you're looking for what happened a long time ago, at least from my perspective, you can check out the video from the last Bible study up here. What we see is that Paul has been arrested in Jerusalem. He came back to Jerusalem after being slandered by some of his opponents. James concocts this plan of how he can gain some street credibility with the Jews and Christians that are in Jerusalem by sponsoring these 4 individuals who are under a vow. Paul does that. It does work to that effect. However, Paul's opponents come and they accuse him of bringing a Gentile into the Jewish temple, a big no-no. Paul is then arrested for causing a ruckus, basically. The Romans get involved. Paul continually kind of hides his citizenship, and the people in authority don't ask and get themselves into a little bit of trouble. So they keep trying to kick Paul up to the next echelon of the hierarchy so that they don't face the blame. Paul then decides, well, I really need to go to Rome. He's been trying to get to Rome. God told him that he will get to Rome. And so he sees his opportunity to appeal to Caesar. He takes it. However, that does condemn him because when King Herod Agrippa and also Festus, the governor that was in charge of this area, agree that, hey, the accusations made against him are not true. We could have set him free, but he has appealed to Caesar. Now he needs to travel to Rome and have his hearing. That's where we pick up the narrative and verse or chapter 27. All right, so let's look at this text. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, notice the we here. So Luke here is writing, and he is saying, I am involved in this journey as well. This is a first-hand account of what he witnessed. They delivered Paul and some other prisoners, so he's not alone in this case, so to a centurion of the Augustan cohort, we don't really know what that was, named Julius. So we got this guy by name. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius, remember this is the Roman centurion in charge of all of this, treated Paul kindly and gave him leave in Sidon to go to his friends and be cared for. So you have a prisoner who you have to deliver to Rome. Your ship pulls into port and nearby, and you'd say, okay, well, yeah, you know some people here, go and talk with them. Just make sure you're back here by 5, right? It's like a cruise. Like you got to be at the dock at 5, or they're going to leave you behind as they go on to the next island. You know, so this is probably not the smartest idea on behalf of Julius, but we're going to see his relationship with Paul, his interaction with Paul, is going to be very important in this chapter. Because they're about to embark on a long journey, and it may be helpful if you have a map. So you can search like Paul's trip to Rome, Paul's shipwreck, or Acts 27 map, something like that, and you'll see one of these maps. So we're over here in Caesarea, okay? Then they just make this short jaunt up the coast to Sidon. Here's where Julius lets Paul get off the ship and go talk to some of his friends. They hop back on, and now they're going to make their way west. And their idea is to kind of sail along the coastlines here and get there. But they're going to be blown way off course once we start getting near Crete. All right. And then from Crete, there's 14 days that they are just at the mercy of the wind and the waves. And that's how they'll eventually end up way over here by Sicily. Okay. All right. So a map kind of gives you that important information of where they're going. But the fact that he let him off the ship to go talk to his friends is rather remarkable. Verse 4, and putting out to sea from there, we sail under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. So they used the island of Cyprus as a wind block. And you see that here on the map where they're like, oh, well, we're going to go straight, over here to Sparta, right? But Greece, we're gonna come down and we're gonna let the island block our way, and then we'll sweep back up this way as their plan. But when they get on the other side of the island of Crete, things just get messy and they're blown off course. When we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There, the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. This isn't some accident. This is probably part of the plan of transport. There's a lot of grain ships moving from Egypt up into the Roman province, okay, sending their offerings and taxes and whatnot and to feed the people. And so the centurion says, okay, well, this is as far as this ship can take us. Now we're going to get on this one. Everybody get on board. This was common practice, apparently. Verse 7, we sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. I'm guessing that's pronounced. Here it is. All right, there's Cnidus, right? Okay. As the wind did not allow us to go further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, which was near which was the city of Lasea. Since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over. So the fast here is referring to the Day of Atonement. So even though these were Christians, they still had their Jewish roots. Okay. So they are still marking time by a lot of the same festivals and holidays that they did before, even if they're not observing them in the same way. Obviously, the Day of Atonement would be important and would be knowledgeable for everybody. It just is ingrained into them, even if they're not still slaughtering the lamb and putting its blood over it and eating in haste, that sort of thing. Even though they're not doing those traditional Jewish feasts and festivals anymore, they're still marking time by them because they matter to a lot of people and also to the readership. Luke knows that a lot of the people that are going to be reading what he's writing are going to be familiar with that time. And so he marks that time by saying the fast was over. We're getting into the dangerous months for travel. Everybody that was around there would go, oh, yeah. You don't want to travel after the fast, especially on the open water, right? So that's what's happening here. It's a little bit strange to us, but to ancient people, they would have been like, we totally get it. Paul actually is going to give them a warning here in verse 10. He says, sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. All right, now it may seem here that Paul is being prescient, that he has some foreknowledge. It may just be that he spent a lot of time around sailors and kind of knows these sorts of things. It may just be his opinion. In the end, he's going to be almost 100% accurate. We can see that, and if you're familiar with this chapter, you know that this is the shipwreck chapter. So the cargo is gone in the ship. The part where Paul's going to be wrong, however, is the loss of life. So he doesn't have 100% true knowledge of the future. So this doesn't seem to be something delivered by God. I think it's his own personal opinion and his own concern, but it's a knowledgeable concern. The centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And why wouldn't he? He's like, well, the pilot says, nah, it's fine. Why am I going to listen to the prisoner when the pilot says it'll be fine? Why am I going to listen to a prisoner when the owner of the ship is willing to risk it? Okay. So the centurion was doing what I think anybody would do in that situation. 12. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing both southwest and northwest, better protected against the elements, and spend the winter there. So they know they're not going to get to Rome this way. They're going to have to hole up somewhere and wait for the weather to improve in the spring and summer months. And they take a vote, and the vote says, let's go. And you also have the pilot saying, let's go. You have the owner of the ship saying, yeah, let's go. It's just like Paul saying, I don't think this is a good idea. Well, we'll see who's right. You already know who's right. Verse 13. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they're like, hey, look, the wind calmed down, and it's a south wind. It's going to blow us right up along here, along this coast here, and we're going to just hop over to Italy, right through there, right? That's their idea. The south wind is with them. So everybody goes, hey, look, it is a good idea. So they bring up the anchor, and they sail along Crete, close to the shore. Verse 14, but soon a tempestuous wind, called the northeaster, struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught, it could not face the wind. These experienced sailors could not point the bow of the ship into the wind and break the waves that are coming at it. And so what happens with that is the ship just keeps getting battered and pushed on its side, and it's just going to keep moving. You have to get the prow, okay, that breaks those waves into the wind if you want to like even maintain where your position in the water or safety. It's just dangerous to be broadside to the oncoming wind and waves. I'm not a sailor, but I am an Eagle Scout, and I do have a sailboating merit badge to my name. All right. And I remember after that, a class trip in maybe 8th grade, science, nature. And we had to go from the main camp in canoes, and I hate canoes. Hate them with a passion. The worst boats ever invented, as far as I'm concerned. I had to go in the canoes onto this island where we were going to survey the flora and fauna, right? Have lunch there and come back. Well, when we got there, it was fine. But then it starts to storm while we're on the island, and the teacher is like, we need to get back, right? And so I'm in a canoe with somebody that has never been in a canoe before that day. And the waves are coming, and yeah. And I'm like, you got to sit down, get low, and we got to turn into we got to paddle this way, you know. And so we got to the shore. But I remember some of our group they ended up across the lake because they could not turn into the wind. And so they just had to keep going with the way the waves and the wind took them, and it just blew them to the other side of the lake. And then they had to find somebody there. Then they had to give a phone call. This was before the days that everybody had cell phones, right? And then our teacher had to like drive around the lake and pick them up and bring them back. It was kind of a big traumatic thing. So I'm not a sailor. I do have some experience out on the water, even being in a storm. So I can kind of identify with the terror on a smaller scale. But a lot of this is foreign to me, as it is to many of you. Don't understand ancient sailing techniques. But here we have now they cannot get into the wind, and so they're being just beaten by the waves and moved along. Verse 15, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Better to just go with the flow than fight it and be broken up. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. Now, this ship's boat is going to play into this narrative in an important way. This is the lifeboat, or, you know, they would park the big ship off the coast, and then if they wanted to go to land, they would take the small skiff in, okay? They usually towed this little lifeboaty kind of thing behind the larger ship, all right? But they're saying, well, we don't want to lose that, so let's bring that. They probably brought it on board of the bigger ship, all right? After hoisting it up, so that's why we think we just bring it on board, they use supports to undergird the ship. So I don't really understand this. What I read was that they're using like ropes to wrap around the whole thing to kind of just hold everything together so that the boat doesn't come apart at the seams, kind of a thing. But I don't know how they did that, and especially in a storm, that had to be quite an undertaking. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis. Now, Luke writes this as if everybody knows what the Syrtis is. And of course, we're like, what is he talking about? Well, there were apparently 2 large sandbars that were in this area, and they were called the Syrtis. And this is the most dangerous one. And sailors feared this thing because you never knew exactly where it was. And how deep you were, those sorts of things. You didn't know if you were by it because there's really nothing out there. And so the sailors are like, well, we're near this thing. It's out here somewhere. And if we hit it, we are lost because we're in the middle of the ocean except for this little sandbar, right? Ocean, the sea, sorry. So they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. So like, we're not going to fight this sort of stuff. We're just going to try to float on top of the water as best we can. We're not going to try to drive into it and risk the keel going down and connecting with this thing. So we're just going to try to be as light as possible and stay up top and just kind of float along and take it. We can't fight it, so we'll just go where it's going to take us until the storm breaks, and then we can make our way again. Verse 18, since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. Now, this is a commercial ship that has deliveries to make and everything else. So this is a last resort to get rid of the cargo, right? So they're going to be chucking this stuff over the side. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. So they've come to a conclusion that we need to be lighter than what we are even now. And the last resort is to use everything that we can steer with, and metal, anything like that. We need to lighten the boat as much as possible, chuck it overboard. And we can't fight the wind. So we just don't want to run aground because we're heavy. 20, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. So they're out in the middle of the sea. They've thrown everything overboard except their food, right? And they have no way of really like catching the wind anymore. Probably their main sails they pitched along with all the tackle to raise and lower them. They probably lashed the rudders in a position straight, so they're not just like going in circles and spinning. So at least as the wind pushes them, they can move with the wind. So they're just a piece of flotsam, basically floating on the face of the sea. And they have no idea where they are because they can't see the sun and the stars. So there's no way to navigate. 21. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me." Paul, now is not the time to say, "I told you so." Okay? They all know that. All right? But this is Paul. And not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Now I urge you to take heart. Like, why? And he says, there will be no loss of life among you, but we're just going to lose the ship. Cargo is already overboard. The ship, Paul says, is going to bust. But hey, don't worry, we're all going to survive. How does Paul know this? He says in verse 23, "For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong." So he says an angel. That means messenger. Okay, so the people probably understood that messenger. But Paul has to explain, it was a messenger of the God to whom I worship. That gives us the impression that he was among people who did not believe the same thing that he did, okay? So Paul is using this as an evangelism opportunity to say, my God can save us, all right? This angel said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar." Paul's still like, I got to get to Rome. That's where I'm going. Nothing's going to stop me, not even this storm. "And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you." So by extension of Paul being on board, others will be spared. Paul here is sort of a Christ figure that because of his presence, others will have life. And they're all in the boat with him, and we are all in the boat with God. And if you look at many Christian churches, they are at least have some nods toward being in a boat. Martin Luther's flood prayer, his famous prayer that he wrote for baptism, actually says the church is an ark, like Noah, all right, in which people are saved from the storms and everything that's out there. So there are many churches that have those ship, boat, Noah's Ark themes because of that, okay? So here we see that those in the boat with Paul will be saved because of his faith in Jesus. And why should Paul have faith in Jesus in a storm? Well, Paul has probably heard the accounts of Jesus calming the storm and walking on water, right? He hung out with those guys who witnessed that. They were all fishermen for the most part. It's probably something they talked to quite a lot about. Yeah, you go, like, dude, remember that storm we were in that one time? And then Jesus like woke up and told it to shut up and be quiet, and it did. Like, that was amazing. Oh yeah, you remember the time that we thought we left him behind and he came walking out in the water? And Peter, remember that? Like, you took like 3 steps, man, and then you started to sink, right? You thought you were lost, but Jesus picked you up and put you back in the boat, right? So they talked about that. Paul was present for that. And so now he's saying, I believe that there is a God who walks on water and calms the storm. He will save us, and I promise you that he will save you as well. That's what Paul says. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. God keeps his word. But we must run aground on some island. So Paul is saying, you know what, I remember I told you that we were going to lose the ship, we were going to lose the cargo, and we were going to lose life. Well, I was wrong about the life thing. We've already lost the cargo, and now we got to lose the ship. You all know that we're going to hit something out here, right? But we'll be okay. That's what Paul says. All right. 27, when the 14th night had come. So they are blown without their sails up and without any idea where they are for 14 days, 14 nights at least. So that's what we see here on this map. That here around Fairhavens, here's where they catch the nor'easter. It was probably a wind that came down from the highlands here on Crete, caught the sail and just pushed them out here into the middle of the Mediterranean where there is virtually nothing. Look, there's no land here, all right? And you can't see this over here. You can't see, you're just in the middle of nowhere. And it just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, right? That's where they're headed. So 14 days of that, of thinking, when are we going to hit a sandbar and be stuck out here? When are we going to be tipped over? That sort of thing. When will the storm break and we can figure out where we are? Who knows? As we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. Why they suspected that is unknown. They took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. So they let down usually like a rope that had knots every fathom, okay? And a little further on, they took a sounding again, and it's 15 fathoms. So the land is coming up, and they're getting closer. Fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. So like, we're heading towards land. We're going to crash. Put down the anchors, slow us down. Let's drag them on the bottom. And hopefully when morning comes, we can at least see what we're heading towards. But they're going to do something a little underhanded. 30, as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul says something to the centurion. So these sailors are like, listen, we don't want to die with all these guys, right? We can all take the skiff and make a better way, and then instead of crashing out here in the island and starving to death. All right, so let's take our chances. So these professional guys are going to abandon ship and leave everybody behind that doesn't know how to work the ship, right? Somehow, Paul gets wind of this. You notice what's going on. And Paul says to the centurion that he's befriended, Julius, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Now, he's probably talking about what God told him, that there will be no loss of life. But he's also just saying, listen, you don't know how to do this. These guys are the professionals. You need these people. So if you let them go, if they escape, we're all dead. So there's a little bit of prophecy here revealed by God, but there's also a lot of practicality. And the centurion recognizes this. So the centurion, or the soldiers under him, cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. Saying, oh, you think we're going to take this lifeboat and some of us are going to be saved? Nope. Cut the lifeboat and send it. We're all in this. We sink or swim together. Okay? So that's what we got going on. 33, as day was about to dawn, okay, so their prayer that day would come, Paul urged them all to take some food. And now they think they're heading towards land, okay, and that they're going to crash, and that they don't know where they are. They could be out in the middle of the sea, or they could be on some shore somewhere. They have no clue. But Paul's saying, listen, the only thing we haven't thrown overboard is the food, because obviously we all need to eat. Today is the 14th day in which we haven't eaten anything because we didn't know how long we're going to be shipwrecked for. We might as well eat something. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. So he gives them that promise again that he received from the Lord. Verse 35, and when he had said these things, he took bread, okay, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Now, this language, for Christians who are familiar with the book of Acts, is very similar to what Jesus does when he has suppers with the disciples. So at the Last Supper, he takes bread, breaks it, and gives it to them. Jesus does the same with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. In the book of Acts, we're told that the people devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the breaking of the bread, which is probably a reference to Holy Communion instituted by Christ our Lord. But that doesn't mean that every place where the Bible talks about the breaking of bread, you can assume that they're having the sacrament of Holy Communion, where Christ is present in true body and blood, in with and under that bread and wine as he promised. It is unlikely here that Paul is celebrating communion with almost 300 people that he hardly knows, some of which are obviously unbelievers. This doesn't make any sense. Because Paul is the same person who writes about how you need to be of one doctrine and belief with the people you commune with, or you do an affront to God. You mock God. He's not going to commune a bunch of Roman pagans and prisoners from who knows where. All right. So the idea that they're having communion before they shipwreck is just, it's nonsensical. Okay. Just because the language is the same doesn't mean that's what's happening. The breaking of the bread does include communion in some places in the Bible, okay? However, in the early church, not only did they celebrate communion, but they also had a meal together, an agape meal, a fellowship meal, all right? A potluck, if you will, afterwards, or in the context of the entire worship service, the entire day. So you can't just take one part and make it apply to the whole, all right? So Paul, it's unlikely here that he is celebrating communion. Doesn't have any wine either. It doesn't mention that, right? So it just seems like, hey, we have some wheat on board. Before we throw it overboard to try to get over the reef or whatever's waiting for us, let's eat something because we don't know what's going to happen afterwards. So let's take some of that wheat. Let's grind it up. Hey, we got a little fire here. Let's cook it with some cakes. Here you guys. Let's all eat, and then we'll see what happens tomorrow. Is what I think is happening here. All right. So he broke it, they began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, so when they all had their fill, then they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. All right, interesting fact. So for communion to happen, we believe that we need to have two specific elements. One is bread, and the other is wine, particularly grape wine, because the Bible does talk about fruit of the vine, a term that is peculiar to grape wine, and most even other fruit wines are made with a grape base. I'm also an amateur winemaker, if you didn't know that, so I've done that in the past as well. So even when you make something like, I had a peach tree in my front yard, I made peach wine one time, you still use a grape base because grapes are God's natural winemaking fruit. They contain everything that you need to make wine in their own little package, right? So grape wine, fermented grape wine, because the Hebrew word is yayin, it means to bubble up. It's effervescent. That is the action of alcohol being produced by yeast consuming the sugar and producing carbon dioxide and other flavonoids and all that sort of stuff that happens when you're making wine and fermentation. Also, Jesus was gathered with his disciples to celebrate the Passover festival, which he then turns into his sacrament of Holy Communion through his institution of, this is my body, this is my blood, take it, eat it, take it, drink it, okay, for the forgiveness of your sins. Do this in remembrance of me. Jesus is using the elements that were on the table, which were very specific, okay? So they needed to have unleavened bread, because remember the Passover going back to Egypt. They weren't to wait for the bread to rise. They had to move. And also fermented grape wine. The Passover celebration to this day, for observant Jews, still includes the necessity of unleavened bread and fermented grape wine, okay? Because that's what God mandates in the Old Testament. So that's what would have been on the table when Jesus celebrated. So we know that he used grape wine. Bread is a little bit different, okay? So although the Passover festival required unleavened bread, the words in the New Testament that pertain to Holy Communion do not use the word in Greek for unleavened bread. Instead, it uses a more generic term for bread. The word for unleavened bread in Greek is azumos, and the word that's used in the New Testament is artos. Artos is a much more generalized term for bread. It includes bread that has yeast and is raised. It also includes unleavened bread that hasn't. It includes bread baked into cakes and bread baked into loaves. It includes barley bread and wheat bread and rye bread. Okay? If you were to go into your grocery store and you see the signs up above and you see the bread sign, that's what artos means. And there you'd find all different types of breads. Okay? That is the term that's used in the New Testament. So the bread that we break, it is a participation in the body of Christ, Paul writes, the artos that we break, right? So although the Passover festival required unleavened bread and fermented grape wine, when we get to the New Testament, the words themselves allow for a greater flexibility in the type of bread used, but also a limitation to the grape wine, the fruit of the vine that is used for the wine. It has to be wine. Grape juice does not count. Sorry, people, it does not. Koine Greek, in my recollection, does not even have a word for grape juice. They do not understand it. That the closest thing we get to is a word that's like trux. It means the mashed up grapes and juice that are waiting to ferment. They would have called it new wine. It hasn't gotten strong yet. It's new, right? But it is still containing alcohol from the very beginning. The arresting of the fermentation process that Welch perfected, all right, because I think he was a teetotaler, right? You need pasteurization and refrigeration to stop grapes from becoming wine. And they didn't have that. So they don't even have a word for grape juice. All right. So the very words in the Bible allow for different types of bread to be used, but wine is limited to fermented grape wine. It doesn't specify the color, whether it's red or white or amber. It doesn't specify the alcohol content of that wine, but there must be some effervescent process, because the Hebrew word is yayin, to effervesce, which means it has to contain at least some alcohol that hasn't been arrested in that process and stopped and prevented unnaturally. Okay? So all that is to say, one of the weird things that happens is with this celiac disease and gluten allergies, how do you get around that? So Redeemer, our church here, does have, this is called a PICS, and inside of it are what are known as gluten-free wafers. Sorry, these have not been consecrated. Don't worry about that. These are made with non-wheat grains, but there is still grain there. So we understand that artos allows for a great flexibility in the grain that is made. And you actually see that if you go to our LCMS page. Where did it go? It always takes me to the bottom every time. So, and the frequently asked questions, and you come to the Lord's Supper. Right here, can a person use wheat and gluten-free communion wafers as an option? In the LCMS, we generally have commended the question of gluten-free wafers to the realm of individual pastoral judgment. All right. In the 1983 report of the Theology and Practice of the Lord's Supper, the CTCR, stated the following: the scriptures are silent on the source of the bread. It may be baked from the flour of wheat, rye, barley, or other grains. Okay. Rice is also a grain. It would seem consistent with this position that bread made from this grain would be permissible. People can bring their own gluten-free bread to the pastor. However, he want to investigate that. That's kind of a weird case, but I have done that when I've done home communion. Oats, corn, rice, there are all possibilities. So there are possibilities that we could use other grains because it falls under the realm of artos, okay? That's the Protestant or the Lutheran position on it, okay? That it's kind of up to our discretion and that the word allows for greater flexibility. However, for Roman Catholics, the answer is no. The Roman Catholics say it has to be made with wheat, and therefore it has to contain gluten. So they do not have a gluten-free communion option. They have a low gluten option, which is very low, which is heavily argued in the Catholic circles of whether that's acceptable for people with celiacs or not. But the weird thing for me is that the justification for requiring communion to have gluten and to be made of wheat, they go back to this passage from Acts, where they talk about, well, Paul breaks bread and then they cast the wheat into the sea. So that must mean that wheat is what they ate. So when Paul celebrated communion, he was using wheat. Therefore, we must use wheat. I find that to be a strange connection because I don't believe that Paul is celebrating communion with 275 other people that he barely knew, most of whom were probably not Christians, right? That just doesn't make sense to me. So what I found interesting was that in this debate about how do you commune people with celiac and gluten allergies, and can you use gluten-free wafers, and what are they made out of? Rome, the Roman Catholic Church, insists that you must have wheat and they must have gluten. And the proof text they used for that is this strange text in Acts, which has nothing to do with communion, in my opinion. Anyway, that's my opinion. You can make up your own mind, but I do find that odd. Many churches do have gluten-free wafers. Now, is that what we want to use for everybody? No, because there's questions that arise. Is this what Jesus intended, and that sort of thing? Because it's not unimportant what Jesus says in his words. At the same time, can we make an allowance in very specific cases? I think so. So an exception doesn't make a rule, but we want to try to be as faithful to Christ's words as we possibly can. So our wafers generally contain gluten and wheat. We do have gluten-free. We do keep them separate so that there's no cross-contamination, and because people can be very sensitive. But it's not our preferred method, but it's something that we do, okay? So just a little side excursion there, but I find it interesting that Rome uses this text from Acts as a proof text so that they say that their communion has to contain wheat and has to contain gluten. But I don't think that this passage has anything to do with Holy Communion. That's just my opinion. So they all eat, they cast the wheat out, and they're leaving it up to God. Verse 39. Now, when it was day, they did not recognize the land. So we were moving towards land, but we don't recognize it. They noticed a bay with a beach. Like, okay, hey, we can land there. That's probably the best option. And which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. They cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, and they loosened the ropes that tied the rudders. Hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. So they kept a small sail to just sort of guide them. But they weren't light enough. They all ate too much before they passed the wheat into the sea. They struck a reef. They ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the surf. So the boat is really being eaten alive by the waves chomping, right? 42, the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. Now, the soldiers that were there required the centurion over them. If the prisoners escape, they forfeit their life. So they think it's better that I kill the prisoners and have to say, I'm sorry, they all tried to escape, so we murdered all of them. And their superiors would go, well, that's unfortunate, but at least you didn't lose any of them. They figured that was a better option than saying, yeah, a couple of them swam off and we don't know what happened to them. And but we saved the rest of them, and then they lose their life because they lost some. It's better to kill them all and then not answer for that than to lose them and lose our own life. But here's where the relationship comes in, 43. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. So Julius says, you know what? No, we're going to take a risk because I believe Paul and what he said was true. So he ordered those who could swim to jump overboard and to make for land. And the rest, he put on planks and pieces of the ship being chomped by the sea. And so it was that all were brought safely to land, as Paul said. Okay? And where did they land? Well, for that, you have to go to the next chapter. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a preview here. After we were brought safely through, when we learned that the island was called Malta. So you look on our map here. They landed over here. That's a long way from Crete. Long way of nothingness out there. All right? And now they can just hop these short land juts or even take a small ship from here to there, and they'll get to Rome. So it's great fortuitousness or God's providence that they landed where they did. Fun fact, there is not a Lutheran, a Roman Catholic church of St. Paul of the Shipwreck. And where is it? It's on Malta. It's the oldest church there. It commemorates Paul being there. You can go there to this day. Beautiful place. And inside, they supposedly have one of Paul's wrist bones. So you can see it's set there in a golden hand, so you can see where it was supposed to be, right? You can view a wrist bone of Paul. You can also see part of the place where he was beheaded, the pillar on which he was beheaded and his blood dripped down, apparently. That's also in Malta. And so there's that beautiful church that's there. Where there? Yeah. I mean, beautiful sky. I mean, you can't get past that. Malta is beautiful from the pictures I've seen. And there's a really old, this is from the 1500s, but the celebration of Paul's landing there goes back to the 1st century. I mean, so there's this beautiful church there, and it's an ancient church, but the tradition of Paul landing there and people celebrating that fact continues on. We'll talk more about that next time. But as Paul promised, they have been delivered safely to shore. And so is that going to cause people to believe? Well, we'll see what happens, okay? So as we talked about today, we see that there is a very practical aspect to all this travel. That even though Paul knew he was supposed to get to Rome, that didn't mean that the journey was going to be easy. That's an aspect for your own life, as you think that even though you're carrying out God's plan, doing what you're supposed to do, doesn't mean it's going to be easy, that there are shipwrecks along the way, there's uncertainty along the way. We learned a lot about communion and why you have to have bread of some grain, why we don't believe it's limited only to wheat, but that would be primarily what we would use. It makes the most sense. But we do need to have fermented grape wine because of the words that are used in both Greek and in Hebrew. So we are very attentive to the words that Jesus uses because it is the context of his last will and testament. That's why he says, you don't get to change somebody's last will and testament, and you don't get to say, well, he said to use this wine, what's in this cup, referencing the cup from Passover, which was fermented grape wine, but I bet what he meant is that we could use Coca-Cola if we really wanted to. Like, no. He says, this is my body, but what he meant to say was this represents my body, or it symbolizes my body, because I'm not really here. Like, well, no, we have to take God at his word. And if we start to undo that word, then the things about, well, you were forgiven and God loves you, those are also questionable too. So we have to take God at his word, and that leads us to some uncomfortable places sometimes because the Bible and God's word doesn't always mesh with what people want to do. And then you have to determine whether people are wrong or whether an almighty and all-knowing and all-powerful God is wrong. I know how I answer that question, so hopefully you do too. Thanks for joining me. I really hope that the audio came through. Sorry if it was a little bit rushed. I got 4 minutes before my next meeting. If you'd like to continue to follow along, hopefully I'll be back on Wednesday. Also, if you do get anything out of this, please throw a few dollars towards Redeemer's building project. That's a good way to say thanks if you've gotten anything out of these studies and studying along with me. Because, man, we got a big task ahead of us. So I will put that. Oh, wait, I do have that here. See, yeah, you can scan this and it'll take you to a donation page, right? And also, I believe that the link to our building fund is posted in the comments down below. That's the link over there. But thank you so much and for joining me, and God bless you, and I will see you next week. Take care.